Good morning. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul.
and Jolene.
And today we have Matthew, and Dave from the Effekt podcast.
Hi.
Hello.
I contacted them years ago, ran an email to them, and they seemed like a pair of nice guys. I even left you guys, I think, a positive review somewhere. And you responded to me. I was like, wow, they're really nice. So I decided to listen and kept listening. And you're here talking to us at 6 o'clock in the morning. So every time we start an interview, we want to ask people, what's your gamer roots, right? So let's start with Mateos. He was the first one in the meeting. What was your first gaming experience? Whether it was a board game, probably a board game, I'm thinking. And how did that transition from playing like regular board games, like let's say Sorry or Candyland, depending on how young you were, to something more hobbyish games?
Okay, well, let me talk about my favorite game of that childhood era is Mousetrap. Have you seen that, where you build the mousetrap as you go around the board?
Of course.
I got that one Christmas. I love that game. I love that game to death. But we played all the family board games. But I also remember the moment so clearly where we'd gone to visit my grandma, and we were sitting in her house on a boring Sunday morning, and my mum passed me an article out of, well, I guess Americans would know it as the Times of London, but a Sunday edition of the Times of London is called the Sunday Times, and it used to come with a colour supplement. And in the back page of this colour supplement, or not quite the back page, but in towards the back of this colour supplement, there was a little picture of a lead dragon painted and a little adventurer, and a very small article about the launch in the UK of Dungeons and Dragons.
Wow.
And she said, oh, you might be interested in this. And I was.
How old were you?
This was probably, I think, so I'm putting two clues. I think Games Workshop started publishing a licensed version of D&D, and of course doing the publicity around it in 1977. So I think I was 10 years old at the time.
Wow.
But I don't think it was until next summer that I'd saved up enough money to cycle to my local department store in the local town. We lived out in the country, so I had to cycle a couple of miles into, Dave will know this, Welwyn Garden City. And I went to what was then the Welwyn stores, which had in its, it was a big sort of like a Sears,
okay.
but local. And it had a little bookshop area that they were selling the boxed version of this game. And I remember strapping it to the back of my bicycle and cycling home again. And then, frankly, being utterly disappointed when I got home, because there were no little figures like they've had in the advert. There were just some crummy dice and two feeble booklets stapled together. And I started reading the rules, and it started talking about, how do you get a game together? Well, I was misinterpreting how you get a game together. It said, what you need to do is put up a notice in your local hostelry, and people would come and join your party. And I'm thinking, I'm 10 years old, maybe by then. I can't do this. And I invited a friend round called John, and we puzzled over the books for a while, and then did something else entirely, played with some toy soldiers or something. And actually, it was only then when I went to what we call secondary school, later that year, so I was 11 years old, and I met actually Dave's brother in what was then called the War Games Club at school.
Oh,
but they weren't playing any war games, they were playing role-playing games. And I had my first session of D&D and fell in love with role-playing, basically.
And that was at school?
And that was at school, yeah.
So
with Dave's brother as my mentor.
Oh, Dave's brother. So this is 1978, 1979, around there?
Yeah, end of 78, sometime in September to October 78, I think was the first time I went down there.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty young. So obviously Dave was already playing by the time Mateo shows up at the school, because your older brother is playing.
Well, my brother's 3 years older than me, 3 years ahead, and Matt's 2 years older than me. So when I finally ended up going to the school, I was the sprog, the little snotty-nosed younger brother that my brother didn't want to associate with, and neither did
and still doesn't, frankly, but we put up with it.
And yeah, so my first experience was playing the web part of Dungeon Q1, Queen of the Demon Web Pits, D&D, a module. And I remember doing that, sat at the table in the hall of our house, and my brother running me through kind of an hour of play. And then we went on and played the game properly. And that was my first ever introduction to Dungeons and Dragons. And I would have been about 10. This is just when I was starting secondary school. And it was, I loved it. And in those days, or on that first occasion, there was only me and my brother playing. So I had 5 characters. But I remember the big fight against Lolth at the end of the scenario, where my characters were dying like flies, and I'd cast Bigby's crushing hand on her and had 1 round left, and I needed to score 8 or more hit points to kill her on a D10, and I rolled an 8. And I can still remember going, yes, oh yes. And at that point, I've been role playing ever since. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah. So that's pretty amazing, because I have an older brother who's like 5 years older, and he started playing in high school, and I was still in grammar school. And then he kept talking about this game, and I'm like, I want to play. He kept saying, yeah, you're too young, you're too young. And finally I wore him down, and he photocopied the original D&D. And then we started playing, and then the rest is kind of history. But I was around 10 or 11, around 1978.
Yeah, so for me, it would have been 1980, a couple of years after when I was 10. And then Matthew and Tony, my brother, and a few others created a club outside of school called the Highfield Wargamers, or was eventually called the Highfield Wargamers.
It was called Highfield Wargamers quite early on, actually. So my parents moved into town, in fact, walking distance from school.
Oh, wow.
And I can't quite, one of the challenges, of course, with the school club is, I honestly can't remember, Dave, but we were staying there for about an hour or so one evening a week after school, maybe a couple of hours, but it wasn't very long that we had the club at school. Whereas if we played at somebody's house, we could spend the whole afternoon or into the evening there. So since I was moving close to the school, I said, if we want to do it at my house, we can. And in fact, I registered the club as a war games club before my parents had bought the house. So at one point we went to the house for a visit to measure up, and the guy said, I've had this letter here from Matthew Tyler Jones at the Highfield War Games Society.
Oh, so the club was at your house?
Yeah.
Okay.
It moved to my house then, and that's where, and we called it Highfield because at the back of our school there was a house where there was a Highfield, and the school owned a house on it that was called Highfield, and we thought Highfield sounds a bit like some fabulous battle that might happen. So we decided, rather than call it the Queen's Road, which is actually where my house was, War Games Club, we called it a Highfield War Games Club.
But then that became a Saturday afternoon tradition that lasted, well, until we all went to university. So it lasted 8 or 10 years of going to Matthew's on a Saturday afternoon, playing games, having tea and donuts, which was the traditional thing that Matt's mum would always bring out for us. and that club, it wasn't just role playing, so we did play some board games as well. And we had a fabulous thing where we had a league tournament where everyone chose a game as their home game, and we all played each other at your home game and an away game. And that was, well, again, we could talk for hours on this, but that's great fun. But there was a lot of role playing going on. I think role playing was the main thing, certainly as time.
So it was board games kind of once every 4 weeks, I seem to remember, roughly.
No, board games fell off a bit, and we ended up role playing.
So you played with your older brother. You played with Matthew. How was that like, meeting Matthew? I mean, you guys obviously are lifelong friends now, but he's a little bit older. Was he like your older brother Tony, kind of like, treated you like that little kid brother? Or did he actually?
Definitely. Dave was the little kid, actually.
I wasn't treated like a brother by Matthew and the others. I mean, I was certainly tolerated to begin with, but I don't remember that lasting that long. Actually.
Okay, good.
So I was made welcome. I wasn't there under sufferance or anything. It's.
And we had quite a diverse group. So we had Andy Brick, who's one of our patrons now. You might have spoken to him, Exius, on our patron Discord. He was there, and a real stalwart of actually the club, particularly after we went to university. He was the one he was the glue that kept us all together coming back for games. but we have lost track with a bunch of people as well, to varying degrees. But we had quite a crowd there. Quite a crowd. We sometimes had like 10, 11 players.
Oh wow,
Mm.
that is quite a crowd. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. Yeah, my brother started a club, and I think we had ended up like with 2 tables of 8 people usually at the club, which was at a library, public library here. Well, not here, but in my hometown. So obviously you still have friends that you play and are in contact with. One is your older brother, so I'm sure you still contact and play with him.
Yeah.
And he's on the actual play, I believe, right, Tony?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tony's on the actual play. And in fact, Andrew, the other person on the actual play, is one of my classmates, in fact, from school,
Wow.
who used to come to, first of all, the school club with me, and then obviously joined us at the other club as well. And so that little quartet, effectively, we've been. Tony dropped out for a bit, didn't he? And then returned.
Yeah, I think life just got in the way. And I think it did with all of us for different times where you didn't get to play quite so often. But then, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, maybe? I'm not sure how long our quartet has come back together again. But the 4 of us had been playing as often as we could make it. And then it was probably about 10 years ago where because we all live in different parts of the country. Tony and I still live in Hartford.
Okay.
But Matthew and Andrew have both moved away because we only then play a couple of times a year. I did the morbid thing of sitting down and working out how much longer we probably had to live and how many more games that actually was. And it wasn't enough. It was nowhere near enough. So since then, we've tried to make the effort to try and play at least every couple of months. And we now have an annual weekend away where we just go and hide off in this old manor house and play games for 4 days. And it's great.
It's amazing. I've heard of that, like from different podcasts and different people who actually do that. They'll go to like an Airbnb, or here in California, people own cabins, which is basically like a condo. I always pictured a cabin to be like a Lincoln's log cabin. Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. No, it's like the full amenities, has a kitchen and all that, running water. So I'm like, oh yeah, I can see doing that. I haven't done it because like my friends still play with us. I mean, we've had to go online since my brother and my friends moved to Oregon and Washington State, but we still play. In fact, we played last night. We played
cool.
Feng Shui, so we're a little tired, right, Jolene?
A little bit.
I can see Matthew is biting his tongue because he wants to say feng shui.
Feng Shui.
I did it on purpose. I know how that gets to him.
It does.
Well, I think I remember reading in the original book that you could say it either way, but
yeah, and I call Morkborg. I don't start going Merkboyer or whatever it's that's it.
Yeah.
So why I'm so obsessed with feng shui, I have no idea.
Yeah.
So have you guys just like a limit, not a limit, but I'm asking how much of a gamer you are. So do you guys attend conventions? I mean, I know you attend conventions because you have a podcast now and are famous in the RPG circles. But before you guys were famous, did you guys go to RPG conventions?
I think we have to think about our very first joint project, Dave, here.
Yeah.
So we used to have a convention in London organized by Games Workshop called Games Day, and that was pretty much the biggest event. This is in the 80s, was pretty much the biggest event in the country. There was a sort of offshoot of Gen Con at Reading University that, in fact, I took a school D&D team once to that, and we didn't do very well. So less said about that, the better. We went there once, but we did generally as a group go to Games Day every year, either as visitors or to run a game, which I think
we did.
Hand over to you, Dave.
Yeah, well, we went one year as the Highfield Wargamers officially, and we produced a little pamphlet which had a scenario in it, an old Judge Dredd scenario which I'd done for the guys, and so we went along, and I ran that a couple of times during the day, and it was great fun. Absolutely loved it. And I mean, this is quite different to the conventions of now, because if my memory is right, for what I can recall, it was one big room.
Right.
That was basically it. And around the edge, you had stalls. You had the Games Workshop stall where they were selling all the minis and all the little lead figures and paints and stuff. But otherwise, everything else was pretty much games, and it was great fun. I remember one year I went along and played the FASA Star Trek game.
Yeah.
And I was playing Bones, Dr. McCoy, and I completely screwed it up. When I had the chance to say, it's life, Jim, but not as we know it, I completely blew it. And the whole point of me playing that character was to say the lines, but it didn't work. I had another one the year after that one, I think. I played they had a tournament game for Golden Heroes, which is a game that we used to play quite a lot.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. A superhero, right?
Yeah, it's a really cool game. And basically you play the game, everyone would vote on who they thought the best players were, and then you go through to the final. Anyway, I was lucky enough to get voted through from my group to the final. And then I did a stupid thing. I smashed a window. We were on the moon and basically evacuated the air in the entire place, which is fine because I didn't need air to breathe.
There you go.
But I spent the whole rest of the scenario fixing the window so everyone else wouldn't get killed, and I didn't win.
So obviously you go back to conventions, so you obviously enjoyed the conventions. You actually ran games there. So how was that experience different from like running games at home? Are you running for complete strangers at these events, right?
Yeah. So in those days, I can't quite remember how it was organized, but it was all kind of informal. We had a table in the middle. As Dave said, we were in what was called then the Royal Horticultural Society New Hall. And it was this big Victorian building. And around the edges were all the kind of, the proper companies and their stands. And in the middle, it was just laid out with tables. And we'd booked one of these tables for the whole day. And people turned up. And we alternated. I think, Dave, was it just the two of us who alternated game? I was playing a Rollmaster game, and you were doing the Judge Dredd game.
Yeah. I don't remember anybody else running a game.
Yeah.
Actually.
So it was kind of like, it wasn't even organized, right? It wasn't like
no. Then people would turn up and sit down and play, or you'd say, there's I don't even remember us having like sign-in sheets or anything like that.
Yeah, that's kind of.
I think when we finished one game, we'd stand up. I was always very happy to stand up and shout, yeah, if anybody wants to come and play Judge Dredd, come and join us. And this was the old Games Workshop Judge Dredd game.
Okay. Do you guys like being a GM or a player more? I mean, some people have like, for me, I was a GM because I was like the only one that wanted to play certain games. So I had to GM it, and I became like the GM dad for a long time. I'm the one that was running games. And then, but I actually started liking it. And then when I played games, sometimes depending on who the GM was, I would get in my head that everybody GM'd like me. So when I ran a game, I expected that GM to be like me. And then when it wasn't, I was kind of like disappointed. So I kind of became more liking to GM more than sometimes be a player. But of course, I love playing games, so it doesn't matter. But do you guys have a preference?
I love both. Yeah, I love both.
I'm going to reject your premise, as they say, and say that, of course, GMs are players. The proper question is, do you like playing a single character or a load of characters? And I think my preference actually is playing the single character. I think I prefer to be a player than a GM and play the rest of the world. But I can do either. I'm happy to do either, but I think I have a slight preference for being a character in the world and exploring.
I think the thing I love most about GMing is creating a scene or a situation or a circumstance that I think's cool and should engage the players, and then seeing them really get engaged with it and really, trying to like tackle it in whatever imaginative way they come up with. And that can be quite difficult because a lot of scenes are really quite mundane. You have building a scene that really carries that kind of emotional, power and potential is quite a challenge. It's not easy to do, to really get your players engaged in it, and getting that right and having the players really, really, really play it is what I love most about GMing. But like Matt, I also absolutely love getting into the head of a single character and the life of a single character.
Right.
And I love the characters that I play. sometimes I'll start a game where so for example, one of the games that we play in our little quartet is Savage Worlds of Solomon Kane.
Right.
And when we started playing that, I knew almost nothing about Solomon Kane. So I was kind of learning it all on the hoof. And I created a character who's a corrupt priest, basically. He's a bit of a nasty man. And I was thinking, I'm not really sure if I'm going to enjoy this. But after 2 or 3 scenarios, I kind of really got into the character and really enjoyed the nasty side of him, and so just really love playing it. So yeah, I love the characters that I play, and I really enjoy that side of playing.
Yeah, I for a long time, and I'm still kind of in that mode. I run games, especially like D&D with my sons and his friends. I said no evil characters for a long time, right? Because I'm like, that's not the kind of, I don't know, genre I want to have my young players play, and I want them to be heroes and look at that from that aspect. But as we grew older, and my son is now 20, I'm not such steadfast. I still want that hero aspect of it, but I'm not so dead set on against people playing evil or even gray characters, right? So
self-centered characters. Yeah.
Yes. So you guys are playing games and creating, obviously running games for each other. What made you want to start a podcast? You started with the Coriolis Effekt, so I mean, it kind of clues in the Coriolis is a role-playing game, and you guys love this game so much that you want to start a whole podcast to it. How did that mature? How did that become a thing? Who started that crazy idea?
I'll start and then I'll hand over because it was. I think I kicked it off, but then Matthew finished it off, as it were. So we got into Coriolis because I had stumbled across Free League with Mutant Year Zero, and there's a story where I was there's a shop in London called the Orc's Nest, which is a gaming shop,
right?
And I was looking for presents for myself for Christmas that I could then give to my wife. And this is years ago. This is like 2016 or something.
Okay.
And I found this game, Mutant Year Zero, that looked cool. I'd never heard of Free League before, but I bought it, took it home, got it for Christmas, and never looked back. Absolutely loved it. So when Free League announced that Coriolis was going to be kickstarted, I thought, right, this is a science fiction game in this setting with this rules engine, and it's going to be brilliant. And I want to play it. I don't want to GM it. I want to play it. So I went to Matthew and said, you've got to back this because I want you to run this game for me. That's me tag teaming over to you now, Matt.
Yeah, that's the tag team. Okay. And yes. And so I thought,
not a crazy idea by this guy.
I suppose I'll get the PDF. And I, but then I read the campaign, and actually I was kind of intrigued by it, and particularly then when I said, I'll back the PDF or something, I'm going to enjoy running your campaign, and Dave said, no, you didn't listen to me. I want you to run it. And so I thought, if I'm going to run it, then I'll go for a hard bundle. I'll go for paper copy, and I'll go for the bundle that's got everything in it. So the tools for running the game effectively that every GM needs, screens and that sort of stuff. So I got that, and then the PDF came, obviously first because they're still printing the book, and I started reading it. And there are very few role-playing game books that I have read from beginning to end. I think, in fact, there's this one, Coriolis, which I sat down in a chair I can see opposite me over there, and kind of just had it up on my iPad, and I just read it all the way through. And the other one was Feng Shui, the first version of Feng Shui, actually, which was just the most entertaining book I have ever read in the role-playing genre. This, frankly, wasn't as entertaining as Feng Shui, but by God, every paragraph was a story hook. And everything you read gave me an idea for an adventure or for a character or for a faction or something that, that it's quite a dense game, Coriolis. Now, I had got some experience. I used to be, I don't know if you were, Saul, Jolene, you fans of Firefly, the TV show?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So years ago, there used to be a podcast all about Firefly called The Signal. And I used to listen to that, and then eventually started writing and performing on it. It was a kind of magazine show. So I'd already broken my podcasting back. And the Sigler was organized by a fabulous woman called Jill Arroway, who had created a really great sort of website where all these different people would feed in their scripts and then their recordings, and then somebody else would take those recordings and edit them. And we were all volunteers from all over the world. We had one volunteer in Tanzania in continental Africa. We had another guy down in Brazil. We had the presenters were in America. Jill was here in England. So we were a really global thing, and it was all organized perfectly. So I thought, well, this is going to be easy. We could do a podcast. And I phoned up Dave and I said, let's do a podcast. And that's it. And so we sat down and recorded once, and episode 1 is that thing. We bunged it out thinking, well, nobody's going to listen to it, but if they do, maybe we'll do another one. And we got quite a positive reaction to it. So that's what we've done. We don't have the fabulous website. We don't have the team of volunteers doing things all around the world. It's just me and Dave getting together, maybe a week beforehand, saying, what are we going to talk about next week? And or if we're lucky, 2 weeks beforehand, and then probably actually writing whatever we're going to talk about next week the day before, or even slightly after we've done the rest of the recording sometimes.
I know all about that. That's the way that on Saturday nights I'm like, what's the topic this week? And Saul's like, I don't know. And I'm like going, okay, dude, come on, let's get it together.
And you're doing it every week. We initially said we're only going to do it every 3 weeks.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And then when we started getting Patreon, and I had only gone for the Patreon route because they were changing their rules, and it looked to me that if we were ever going to have a Patreon, we should get on the thing now. So I started a Patreon, didn't even publicize it, and we had our first patron discovered us and found it and backed us. I think he's still a patron now. Doesn't appear much. Frank Wenberg, I think his name is. Thanks, Frank. So we then made one of the kind of stretch goals of that Patreon that we'd do it fortnightly. Because we were also doing quite long and rambling episodes, because you may have noticed we talk a lot. And I thought we could be a bit more disciplined, make the episodes a bit shorter, try and keep them to about an hour, and do one a fortnight. But you guys are doing it weekly, aren't you?
Yeah. But our podcast, we usually shoot for a little bit over half an hour. So they're shorter, but
sometimes they're longer.
Depending.
They're often longer. Come on, I mean,
they've been getting longer and longer. Yeah.
Sometimes they get a little bit too verbose.
Saul talks a lot.
So
we've never been known for shutting up when we could say something.
So that's pretty cool. Obviously, you love the Coriolis Effekt, the Coriolis role-playing game, and because of you guys, I actually I go, oh, what's this Coriolis about? So because I heard your podcast, it was about 2017, I think, right around there.
Quite an early episode.
Yeah, so I wasn't in on the Kickstarter, obviously, but I had a hard time finding it around here, and I finally got it, or I got the PDF, and I go, oh wow, this is pretty interesting. So you guys loved it, obviously. And I was thinking to myself when you did the podcast, and there was another podcast, I forget what it was called, but it was all about Monty Cook's Numenera game. Well, how much can they talk about this? How long could this podcast last? Talking about one game, but I was really impressed by how deep you guys got into the history and the ideas in the game. Like you guys would come up with kind of like a background expansions of not the rules but the lore, and I was like, you guys are really into it. So I go, these guys are gonna go on forever, but but then I guess Freely kept coming out with more games, and you guys what was the reason for changing the goal or the purpose of the podcast? I mean, it was the Coriolis Effekt, and then you dropped Coriolis and just called it the Effekt. And I understand that you guys are talking about Swedish games, mainly Freely games at that point. But I think you even expanded even more. Now you guys talk about all Swedish games, though not all Swedish games are Free League, right?
Yeah, I think we're still mostly a Free League fan podcast.
Yeah. What made you change your goal or your theme of your podcast?
Well, I think we'd evolved anyway over time. I think we'd started talking about other things, and we had done an awful lot of deep diving into different parts of Coriolis.
Right.
And I think maybe we were just running out of things to talk about, perhaps.
I think there was a genuine interest in all the other games that
that too.
Free League were making. I do kind of miss those days of being, at that time, I think we must have been, Dave, the experts in the Coriolis setting. What with, how deeply we'd read the book, there weren't that many books to read in those days about it. And, we'd taken each one of those story hooks in each one of those paragraphs and effectively built it out. I mean, one of the reasons for doing a podcast for me was I didn't want to write, I didn't want to draw maps and write articles and proofread them and print them out in a fanzine or something. A podcast is a really easy way of doing a sort of fanzine without actually, but you just have to talk about it for an hour and a bit, and then it's out there. So that was one of the reasons. But yeah, I think, I kind of miss those times when we are so inspired by one of the games that we say, here's a little bit of that world that we have created all about that world. I feel we could do more of that, but actually part of the way we're doing it now, so busy, the world's so changing. I haven't read, so the latest thing I got from Free League, of course, is this Moria book.
Right.
Now, we are in no way experts on Tolkien's world.
Yeah.
I'm not going to start that one, but there's a bunch of books we haven't read.
I think it's true, though. I mean, there is a bit of me that sometimes would like to go back to our roots, and our roots was digging into the roots of Coriolis.
Right.
And actually that's where we got our original kind of listenership from, enjoying listening to us doing that kind of deep dive. And I think we've had to evolve a little bit, so we do more interviews than we used to. We obviously talk about other games, but I think the thing I enjoy the most about the podcast is when we do get the chance to have a stop and a deep dive into something quite focused and quite narrow. On, doesn't have to be Coriolis, could be any of the games, but I do that really gets my creative juices going, because I can then throw my ideas and my imagination at it, and people either like it or they don't, so that's one of the fun parts of podcasting.
But I think, again, for you, Dave, one of the challenges now, of course, is you are having to get into the lore of various settings and write up new bits of that lore as your day job.
Yeah.
So when we started doing this, you were a boring old civil servant, and this was a fun thing to do on your evenings off. Whereas now, this is your actual day job, and I'm sure it's still fun, Dave. I'm not saying it's not fun, but that's your day job now. So taking a rest from your day job to do some creative stuff about that you're not getting paid for actually must be a bit of a challenge.
There is definitely a creativity bucket in my head. And during the day, that bucket gets slowly emptied. So the point can come where I just can't be creative anymore until tomorrow, kind of thing. Because I've just done, I've overdone it for that day. Hey, I wouldn't change it. I'm not complaining in the slightest. I mean, okay. The one thing I would change is I'd get paid more. But apart from that, I wouldn't change it. No, it's I'm very lucky, very, very lucky to, one, have had the opportunity to work with Free League when we did. Two, to be able to actually, give up my boring civil service career, which I'd done for 30 years. And, being brilliantly supported by my wife, who was completely behind me with all of this, even though my earnings was going to go poof, down through the floor. So I have to remember how lucky I am to be in this position, when actually there are probably many, many people out there who would give their right arm to have the same chance that I've been lucky enough to get.
I was just going to ask you, Dave, you have that. Well, I think most gamers would love to be in your position. Of course, probably make more money at the same time. of course, but just kind of like a gamer's dream to be able to write professionally and do that. What we love to do is we create stuff and we write stuff for ourselves and our friends and stuff, but to write stuff that's going to be, published and by publishers, kind of exciting and kind of like, I think a lot of people dream about it, but very few of us, do it for whatever reason.
You're speaking for yourself, because that's not my dream.
No.
No.
Are you a gamer? Do you consider yourself a gamer? I don't know. I mean,
yes. Hello.
I think I said most, not all people, obviously, but I think that there's quite a few people who do that, who kind of like, oh, when I retire, maybe I'll write something and get it published. So do you find that like you said, you have a creative bucket? Does being a professional writer now kind of change your feeling about writing or playing RPGs?
I think it inevitably has done a little bit, and I think when we started the podcast, I had no kind of realistic plan that I was going to become a professional writer.
Okay.
I remember talking to Matthew saying, well, if we do the podcast, then we can go and see the Free League guys in Sweden, and then we can become best buddies with them, and then they can give us a bit of work, and then I can become a writer. But this is a total fantasy. This is a fantasy trajectory, which just through by kind of being in the way of luck is the way I kind of describe it. It just all seemed to happen, and here I am. There's definitely a thing. It's kind of poacher come gamekeeper. You as a fan, you do it when you get the chance, and because you're so busy with your day job and life generally, you never get the chance to do enough. So you're always, for me anyway, there was always more I wanted to do.
Right.
Now, obviously, I spend all day doing it. There is definitely a slightly different feel. It hasn't spoiled it or anything for me at all. I still love playing and running games as much as I ever did. But yeah, it's difficult to describe. It's like kind of getting saturated in gaming, which actually, I don't mean that as a bad thing.
Okay.
Maybe steeped in gaming is a better way of putting it than saturated. Right. It's great, but it's kind of an ever present now, because, when I'm working, I'm thinking about gaming. When I'm not working, I'm thinking about gaming. Whereas before, when I was working, I had to think about work. And then when I wasn't working, I could think about gaming. But again, that's absolutely fine. And it's again, I have to remember how lucky I am to be in this position, when actually there are many people out there who would gladly swap where they are with the opportunity to do what I've had the chance to do.
So, Dave, do you have any advice for any aspiring RPG writers out there? I know I gave you this question early, but it can't be all just luck. I mean, there's obviously some. You put stuff out there. You wrote, you created stuff, and to a certain degree, that was good enough to be obviously somebody sought you out and hired you and stuff like that. So, I mean, what advice would you give? Easy advice that you would think that would help? Not necessarily, there's no guarantees, but
So I think for me, the way I describe it is I put myself in the way of luck. So when luck happened, I was just there for it to hit me in the face. And there might be lots of people who do that and then just don't get the break when the luck doesn't happen at the right moment. But what do I mean by that? So for me, it was becoming, building a relationship with Free League. We were obviously doing it through the podcast as fans, but we were then had the chance to help them at UK Games Expo and help them with Alien specifically. It's about building relationships. So I then started talking to people like Chris Birch at Modiphius, right, and Alagila with Firelock and a few others. And that just turned into the opportunity to do more work. And then, the thing with Chris, it was complete. Again, it was putting myself in the way of luck. So I messaged Chris on Facebook ages and ages ago when he was talking about what I thought was going to be a James Bond role-playing game, but it wasn't. It was a James Bond board game. But anyway, I sent him this message and he kindly responded. And he said, okay, well, ping me over your CV. So I sent in my gaming CV, and one little bit in the bottom, which was my current kind of interests, things that I'm really keen to work on, was a Roman role-playing game. And I've still got that aspiration. But at that moment, he was working on Cohort Cthulhu,
Right.
which is the Acton Cthulhu expansion, but set in the sort of the Roman Empire time. And he went, "Oh, you know a bit about Romans." So I then got to work a little bit on Cohort Cthulhu at that point. And that was my way in. So again, I'd put myself in the position by making the effort to try and have a chat with him about something and build the relationship a little bit. And then that luck just came over the horizon and slapped me in the face like a wet fish. And I was, so that gave me that opportunity. So I think the advice would be build relationships, talk to creators. If you particularly like what a creator is doing, go and tell them that and talk about it. Maybe, get involved on their forums, become a little bit known, so they, it's Dave on the forum again. He's, and he says sensible stuff, and that way you slowly kind of put yourself, out there a little bit. Because if you don't do that, then they get so many unsolicited people coming up and saying, "Oh, I'd love to work for you. Here's my card." I think that isn't the way to get into the industry.
Right.
And I think I just want to reiterate that, because when Dave phoned me up and said, right, yes, let's do this podcast idea, and then we'll go and interview them in Sweden, and then they'll give us a job. Not quite as short as that. He had about 3 or 4 more steps in between. And I said to him categorically, I said, "No, that's not the way podcasts work, Dave. That's never going to happen." So there's 2 lessons out of that one. As Dave has already said, put yourself in the way of luck. And that's about personal relationships. It's not about sending off a load of unsolicited things to a load of companies. It's about building those relationships. That's exactly what we did. Yeah. In the end, he convinced me, this is him putting us in the way of luck. He convinced me that we should, as, impoverished podcasters, book a flight to Sweden and basically, message the guys at Feeling and say, right, we're going to be in Stockholm this weekend. Can we possibly meet up? And we did that. And of course, they bought us beer. We sat in a pub together and we interviewed them. But we also, at that point, started building the relationship up with them that has borne the fruit now. And I'm reminded as well, do you guys know a chap called, I think, Reid Hoffman?
No, I don't, actually.
Right. Reid Hoffman is a billionaire now, made LinkedIn, which is, of course, that network about building relationships. Right. Do you know what his first job was?
No idea.
His first job was an editor at Chaosium, editing RuneQuest. You can see his name's on the books there. Do you know how he got that first job?
At Chaosium, I don't know. I'm sure he...
No, of course you don't. You don't know him at all, so you don't know. So let me stop asking the rhetorical questions. So exactly. He got that job by going up to Greg Stafford somewhere with his copy of RuneQuest or whatever, covered in red ink, saying, "I really love this game, but these things here doesn't make sense. This thing here doesn't make sense." And Greg gave him a job, and he was 12 years old at the time. And of course, fantastic. This is about the time that Dave and Dave was younger than me, but, I might have been 12 years old at the time, and I might have had ideas about, maybe when I grow up, I can be write role-playing games or whatever. But we didn't do it. That was a stupid idea. That's not a proper job. You can't do that. So we didn't have the courage to actually go out and put themselves in the way of luck, as Dave has done. And it's taken, Reid Hoffman, if only, Dave, you'd done it when you were 12, you'd be a millionaire by now. But now it's taken 50 years to get, well, not 50, what are you? It's taken 40 years to get the courage together to go and put yourselves there. But yeah, put yourself in the way of luck and build relationships with the other creators.
I mean, it never even occurred to me realistically until 5 or 6 years ago that this was even something that I could even do, or you could even try. And I don't think that, certainly not full time anyway, but it never even occurred to me to try and do it part time. I don't know. Again, I don't know why. It just didn't. It's strange.
Right.
Really.
Right. So I was going to ask you what surprised you the most after starting your podcast. I'll let you answer that question. What has surprised you the most since starting your podcast?
Going over to Sweden and making friends definitely surprised me, because was definitely not going to happen.
So,
but it obviously didn't surprise Dave. So, Dave, what surprised you?
That's a tough one. Well, okay, actually, no, it's not a tough one at all. The thing that surprised me the most is that there are people out there who are willing to listen to the crap that me and Matthew spout the whole time, and actually seem to find some value in listening to it. So that's the biggest surprise. Yeah, when we did the first episode, our production values were pretty poor. You know, had no clue whether anyone would even listen to it at all. So I think, yeah, the biggest surprise was that there was actually an audience out there for my and Matthew's ramblings.
And not just listening audience. Again, when we, as I said before, we put the Patreon out simply because there was an opportunity, and terms are going to get worse with Patreon. I didn't think we were ready to have a Patreon, but our listeners did. You know, and we haven't got a massive Patreon community, but they bring us enough money to keep the podcast going and a bit extra, which has helped us buy the art for Tales of the Old West and things like that. So, you know, the generosity of our listeners and their continued support is a surprise. We are humbled by it, I think.
Well, I think what, I don't know, I don't listen to too many other podcasts. I do listen to like Happy Jacks, and I used to listen to Fear the Boot. But what I really noticed about you guys is that you guys come across as really smart guys. So when I'm listening to you guys talk about, when I was listening about Coriolis, I mean, your ideas were just like really well thought out, and you guys were you guys just really good at putting out your ideas and it makes sense. It wasn't just like, I mean, everybody has these ideas, and sometimes people go, well, that's crazy, right? You know, that's crazy talk. And so some ideas of your guys might have been a little bit odd, but I never thought they were just way out there that just doesn't make any sense. Everything made sense. You guys were talking about things that were only hinted to at the book, and you expanded these ideas. And I thought they were well done. I mean, they were well thought out, and I think that's what made the difference between you and anybody else I've listened to in the other podcasts, is that you guys are not just, you know, throwing out ideas and without too much thinking. You guys really think about what you guys commit to the podcast. So I think obviously there was people who were ready to start that Patreon. I remember when Patreon was going to change. I find it funny that you rushed out and did it before you thought you had anybody of an audience to buy into that. It was probably funny. So you guys are doing a podcast, you guys are being successful, Dave's writing, but during this whole time, you guys have been thinking about Tales of the Old West, because as by my timeline, you guys been working on this for 5 years or more.
Yes, like ish 5 or 6 now.
5 or 6.
We put a video out, which you find on our YouTube channel, where Dave said, we've been thinking about doing this for 20 years. And in that video, I went, no, we haven't. But actually,
in some senses.
Yeah, I think you have, Dave. And in fact, our friend, luckily, one of our friends and patrons, Andy, who we've already mentioned, came back on the Discord and said, oh, yes, he has. You guys have been thinking about it. And he reminded me, I've been playing in this game as well. And so 20 years in the gestation, there wasn't a system that could fit. And then when Forbidden Lands came out, 2 very important things happened, and I did them both. He said arrogantly. The first thing is I said to Free League, one of your stretch goals ought to be creating a sort of OGL type license for the Year Zero engine. And they said, what a good idea. And then that became one of their stretch goals. So that was my idea. Yep.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hang on, here you go. Well done, Matthew.
Very good. Very good.
All the enthusiasts of Year Zero applaud you.
Yeah. And then the next thing I did was I phoned up Dave, and I said, I think I've got an idea about a Western game based on this rule set being Forbidden Lands. That's not actually what we ended up doing, but that was where the genesis was. So whenever Forbidden Lands came out, that's how long we've been working on this specific game.
Yeah.
Right. So I've never created an RPG. I don't know how long it takes or what the standard time to go from beginning of an idea to having something down on paper to say, well, I think we're done. I mean, I think as RPG players and GMs, we always like to tinker. We always like to fiddle a little bit with stuff. Like, I don't think that's quite right, but at sometimes I forget what is it, art? I don't know what it is, but sometimes you just gotta like step away, you know, just put your hands on the table and push your stuff away, put your body away so you can, you know, get it out there. I know you've had like a version of this to your patrons for a while now. I think I don't know when I became a patron, but you guys put out the patron version of the rules a while ago.
I think it's always been one of the rewards for our silver level, what we call our stationary level of support. So
Right.
I think we had something to offer very shortly after starting the Patreon.
Right.
At least a bit of the game. But we've done, I don't know, our numbering system varies, but I think we've done 6 or 7 versions that patrons have got.
I think we're on 7 now, I think, is our kind of getting finalized version. Yeah.
So let's say it's been 5 years. What has taken as long as it has, that long to make the game to the point where you guys are ready to kickstart it, right? It's more or less the rules are kind of mostly done. I don't know. You can tell me. I don't know. What was the biggest hurdle? If it's even a hurdle, is that just you think that's as long as it usually takes? You know, you guys know more about people creating and how long it takes from idea to fruition, I guess, is what I'm talking about.
So I think it's been, again, quite a evolution. So we first took Forbidden Lands as our kind of template for the kind of game we were thinking about. Although very early on we decided certain things, like, you know, it's going to be a gritty historical game. There's not going to be any supernatural weirdness in it. There's none of that. This is a game that's trying to recreate the West of the 1870s. But the game that we were kind of envisioning around using the Forbidden Land rules was much more of a traveling hex crawl Oregon Trail kind of game. And quite quickly, I think there were 2 things came up. One, I think we realized we were much more interested in running a game that was recreating something like Deadwood or Lonesome Dove or those kind of games, which is set much more around a community. But also, it became clear that I think the rules for Forbidden Lands weren't the right ones for the things we wanted to bring out, and they were potentially pushing us down a road that we didn't really want to go on. So I guess, I don't know how long into the development process, maybe 6 months or a year perhaps, we decided to shift away from the Forbidden Land rules and take the Year Zero engine and create it more specifically for the kind of things that we wanted to do. I guess for much of it, we've both been having day jobs, we've both been having lives, so this has been very much a fits and starts kind of development process. When one of us gets the bit between their teeth, we then get a load done, but then it all tails off again. The last big burst we had, which I think probably got me into the position where we were thinking that we could start kickstarting this, was last summer when I did one last big run over the whole manuscript pretty much and got it into kind of where it is now, mostly. So, and that was the point where I started to feel, yeah, there's probably not, you know, there's, like you say, we could tinker with this forever.
Yeah,
we could fiddle about the edges forever, but actually it feels like we've got something that's working quite well here. And we've had a lot of playtesting. So I've been running a playtest group, which I originally started GMing, but I'm now a player in that campaign, and that campaign's been going for ages. And that has identified loads of good stuff, and actually identified that the game as it is right now seems to work really well. And then obviously we have a playtest group with our quartet, me, Matthew, Tony, and Andrew, which again, throwing up some things that we want to incorporate, but also is showing that actually the game is running pretty well. And I think it was a criticism was beginning to form, you know.
Yeah.
So lots of things go by the wayside. Lots of things get refinement. So the way that pushing your role in this game, the core idea has been the same all along. This idea of having faith points to spend and getting those faith points back. But the cost of pushing has seen various iterations.
Yeah.
And And I really think, I don't know how long ago we got the latest one. It was your innovation, Dave, that
Probably
did that
a year ago, probably
about a year ago.
Yeah.
But that was one of the key ones. I think we feel that was, still getting tweaked. I remember saying to Dave a couple of sessions ago, this particular aspect of it isn't fun. And we discussed it and said, okay, how do we, let's not do that. And then do we need something instead? And I made the case that we didn't. So it's really coalesced, I think, in this last year. But also the other thing.
So just on that point, there has been a lot of trial and error, kind of alluded to there. We've come up with this version, but it was because we tried ways that we thought would work, and then in playtesting, they didn't work as well as we'd hoped, or it wasn't getting us the right vibe. Yeah.
I just there's an example of that. I think is a really good example, actually. So one of the innovations that Dave has with Trouble is the cost of pushing effectively. But he said you could buy off Trouble by spending extra faith points if you had them available. And what I like about that, so that's kind of what happens now. Previously, at some point, when I wanted to try and get the idea of faith being a hard resource to measure, I ran a play test with a group of people saying, okay, so when you roll your dice, all the ones you roll are the cost. So the number of ones you roll are the number of faith points you spend in re-rolling that. So you could lose all your faith in one roll if you roll badly.
Right.
Or actually that push may be free if none of them come up one. And I kind of like that sort of not really knowing, but my players hated it. They really hated it. So, obviously that we did one adventure like that, 2 or 3 sessions. And then I said to Dave, no, that's not working. That's a stupid idea. But in the way that Dave have got now of buying off Trouble, he's actually slightly got back to that idea of you don't necessarily know how much your faith push is going to cost you until you've made the roll and seen the results, which is the idea that I really wanted. Yeah. So,
you get to choose whether you're not forced to spend the faith. You choose. You can either take the really bad trouble, or you can spend a bit of faith to make that trouble a little bit less troublesome.
Right. Or even no trouble at all.
No trouble at all, even. Yeah.
If you've got that many faith points. But you've never got that many faith points, so don't worry.
Well, what's been the hardest part of writing the Tales from the West for each of you?
So I think the real challenge is, as we say about Tales of the Old, I'm going to wind back from Tales of the Old West and talk about our gaming here. Our gaming has mostly been in science fiction and in human-centric societies. We haven't done much in D&D worlds where there's a variety of creatures that you can be and a variety of creatures you can fight. Yes, there are obviously some bad guy type creatures, but the social interactions have generally been human, and that we've played like that for nigh on 40 years, and that's what our preference is generally. And so very early on in this, before we had any talk about creating a game out of Forbidden Lands, one of our points about Westerns is that is a very human versus human interaction, very much about how people communicate. And that's the game we wanted to play. And every one of these Western games like Deadlands or even Aces and Eights, sadly, came up with kind of supernatural elements that we didn't really enjoy in our Western, because you think of all those great Western stories, they're so strong because we can all identify with the characters, good and bad. Sometimes we can identify with the characters because they are us. And so we wanted to create a Western that is very rooted in that human society. There weren't any vampires or undead or anything like that as the bad guys. And of course, you realize as you start sitting down to write that the problem with the Western story is essentially white settlers are the bad guys.
What? What are you talking about?
And they're the guys coming into land and stealing stuff, and you've just got to get your head around that and acknowledge that if you haven't got vampires as the bad guys, you are kind of the bad guys. You can want to live a better life, but you are basically making that negotiation. And of course, what it means is we've tried to make a game, as you've helped us do, Saul. Make a game where it's not just the cinematic, mythical white cowboy who's the hero saving the Mexicans in, say, the Magnificent Seven or anything like that. It's everybody. It is the Mexicanos, and it's, everybody in the West has an equal chance to be a character, play a character, and play the game. But if you haven't got any monsters to fight, how do you make drama out of that situation that in this particular, let's face it, really quite difficult history, that is an enormous challenge. Right. And to get it right in a way that isn't going to upset a lot of people is still going to be an enormous challenge.
Right. No, that is pretty tough. I agree. David, do you have anything to add with what Matt said?
No, I think I'll just agree with that. That the probably the toughest thing has been trying to take that principle that we had of reflecting the real history and reflecting it in a way that's sensitive, that is equitable, that is not stereotyping anyone or anything, and is allowing everyone the right level of respect and the right level of recognition, who were living in the West at the time. And as Matthew says, doing that without making a misstep and inadvertently saying or doing something that someone takes offense with is an ongoing challenge.
No.
We have had sensitivity readers in. We've had people like yourself who've given us fabulous feedback on some of the stuff we've been doing, and we need to make sure we reflect that. And we're coming at this with a genuine wholehearted attempt to do it in the right way. But the stories in the West are so compelling, and there's so many stories to tell that you don't need a vampire or an alien or a Cthulhu to spice it up.
Right.
But as Matthew says, your enemy then becomes the evil that is in the heart of another man or woman, and they're trying to do something nasty to you. So it's, the play testings, we involve all kind of all the elements, all the communities. It feels like it works.
No, yeah.
Obviously, once we open it up to a much broader audience, then that's going to be another matter, something else that we will learn. But yeah, that's been the trickiest thing, or the thing that doesn't keep me up at night, but it is the thing that is most on my mind for us to get absolutely right. Because I think on the rules side and the setting side and the traditional sort of gaming side of it, I think we're both quite experienced, and we've done that pretty well. But getting the history right, is a challenge.
So why do you think two British guys are in love with this Western genre so much? I mean, I like it. I've watched spaghetti westerns, but my brother is much more into cowboys and westerns than I ever was. But I've never seen Western Dove, even though I think Matthew just said that it was a fabulous show. I never watched Deadwood, mainly because it was on HBO, I believe, and I don't have HBO. I guess I could have rented it or something. But another thing is I couldn't watch it with my son when he was small, because there's a lot of cussing and a lot of nastiness that happens. And my mother-in-law, who's a teetotaler. I think I watched one episode and I was like, my jaw dropped on how kind of ugly it is, right? Yeah. So, what has attracted you to this Western genre of what? Yeah, why Tales of the Old West?
I think it's something to do with the myth. So I think for a lot of Europeans, not just English people, but you mentioned spaghetti westerns, obviously. The Italians obviously love a Western, and some of my favorite Westerns. I don't know if you've ever seen a film called The Big Silence or The Grand Silence or The Great Silence, but it's chef's kiss, beautiful. And if you see any snowy Western pictures in our book, they are directly inspired by that film. So, but the French have got loads of Western comics. They or bande dessinée, as they say in France. I think for those of us in Europe, if you like, the American West is a bit of a fantasy land without dragons or zombies or vampires, but it is still a kind of a mythical land that those of us who are like one step removed from it can really enjoy. And particularly, as I said before, what we like about playing is interaction of person versus person, rather than simply grinding down the points of the hit points of a dragon. We've always enjoyed that more social interaction stuff. And the West is full of that. Characters you can identify with, characters who are seeking revenge. I mean, I urge you, if you've got Amazon Prime, watch The English, for example, which is a revenge story, but it's not a revenge story like any you've ever seen. It's got a great twist to the ending. It's a transatlantic Western tale, but also it talks about the English, not just because the main character is an English woman, but also because the English is a generic for all the incomers into the West from some of the natives there. It's brilliant. And it's about relationships. And, you know, that's a great story because that is a story about an English woman who's actually quite a wealthy woman and a native who's been working for the US Army. And, you know, they are very different characters who find an understanding together. And around them, there are all sorts of horrible people that you can at least have the pleasure of shooting eventually or defeating.
Yeah. I by accident, I came across it and asked Jolene, do you want to watch the show? And it was a really good show. It's really well done.
Yeah. And again, you see, that's so Hugo Blick, I think, is the writer of that. He's an English writer. So again, he's inspired by that. And I'm now suddenly reminded that I saw a bit of a video where somebody asked him, why are you, an Englishman, so interested in Westerns? And he gave a great answer, so good that I thought, when we do a website, I ought to steal the words that he's just said and put them on our website. And now I'm reminded, and for some time I've been thinking, where do I get the answer to that question about why are English people so interested? He's got a great answer to that, so I'm going to have to go to YouTube and find him, give that answer again.
I think for me, there's definitely something about that. It's almost another world in that, you know, growing up in sort of southern England as I did, you know, there is no frontier here. There is no opportunity to really go and kind of remake yourself. And I think, you know, a lot of the stories of the West are about people who are finding new roots, are building their family. There's a kind of legacy element to it where, you know, they're leaving something behind for very good reason, and they are then trying to create something new, and all the tension that comes with the people who were there beforehand, who've already got something that they might want, or there's an opportunity that they might see to improve, you know, their lives and their futures, and it's just such a melting pot of different communities, different people, in a landscape that certainly on the from the mythological side of it is big sky, wide landscapes, sweeping plains, mountains to ride across. And there's always a lone rider on their horse somewhere in the middle of it. And kind of all of that is all part of the mystique and the mysticism, I think, of that time, which is one of the things why I love it so much. Also, I mean, I'm a historian by training, and I've always been a real fan of the real West history. That all, you know, the mystical side of it plays into my love of the history, which all comes together to create why I wanted to do an Old West game.
Cool.
And we talk a lot about the West makes you as you read our game, or even as it's advertised. We talk about that. And of course, that's fundamentally what we all do in role play, is we all make a character. We don't, when we were kids and we had loads of time at school, we'd developed incredibly long backstories for our characters, and we'd actually kind of finished playing that character before we ever brought him to the table. But now we're grown-ups. We make our character through play, just as Dave was talking about Friar Bellows, his character in Savage Worlds. He didn't really know who that person was until he played it for you. And of course, that is at the heart of the myth of the West, is you don't know who you are until you see what you do in the West. And so it's a perfect setting for role-playing games. I've often said that D&D is actually a Western. And the way people behave in D&D is like they did in the Old West. Role-playing games should be set in the Old West, and they don't need vampires. And so we're determined to find one.
Oh, wow. So your Kickstarter is when? When does it start? Do you have a date yet?
Well, we do-ish. Are we going to announce it?
No, we're not going to announce it yet.
So,
I think we're looking for the first week in September if we're lucky. Yeah.
If we're lucky. Okay. So,
but if you want to know the exact date and be on there first and be one of our early birds, then go to the website, which we will leave. We'll give you the link so you can put it in the show notes, Saul, or just search us on Kickstarter, search the Tales of the Old West, and follow our page, and then you'll be the first to know when it does go live.
Right. So that's always a good idea, is to, anybody listening, if you're interested in any kind of Kickstarter, you can help them out just by signing up early. I think all you need is your email, and if you're already on Kickstarter, you already know all about this stuff, so it helps them out trying to get a gauge of how much interest there is in it. It's pretty exciting. I every time I interview people who have gone through the process of Kickstarter, they talk about checking the numbers not every day, but almost every hour,
every 10 minutes,
and then seeing or whether if it goes slow or fast. It's always been an interesting interesting experience for them to go through.
It's equally exciting and terrifying in equal measure.
Yes. I interviewed Chris Volson, who did the Black Void, and he said that at one point, he was hoping he'd do well, but then he was doing better than he thought he would, and he goes, "Uh-oh, I really have a lot of work to do," because there's these stretch goals he had just put out there, just kind of, well, if this happens. And so he goes, I really had a lot of work to do, and I was really getting worried about.
Yeah, I think you can honestly be too successful in these Kickstarters. And I look at examples like Call of Cthulhu 7th edition, pretty much bankrupted Chaosium. The pirate game 7th Sea pretty much did the same. In fact, Chaosium then bailed out John Wick after he made I think he was the first $1 million Kickstarter for a role-playing game, and yet still managed to.
It sounds kind of crazy, right? It sounds kind of crazy.
So we're going to try and keep our ambitions modest.
Yes.
But if anybody does want to give us $1 million, we'll give you a game that matches.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have anything to add? Anything I missed? When you want to discuss, guys?
No,
I think we've pretty much said everything, haven't we, Dave?
I think for me, I just want to say thank you so much for having us on. It's fabulous to sit down and chat with you. It's been a great conversation, and thank you for supporting us and supporting Tales of the Old West. It's
no problem.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, and thank you, Saul, actually, for the advice you've given us when we've been writing about New Mexico and Mexico itself. You've been a stalwart advisor from the other side of the Atlantic and the other side of the continent on the other side of the Atlantic. And in fact, it made me think you're in our Quickstart as a patron, but I'm going to give you a proper credit in the next edit of the Quickstart. Sure. I think your help's been so useful.
We thought that after we put the Quickstart out, we both kind of went, but Saul isn't mentioned. He's only as a patron. He deserves more than that.
I didn't think much of it. You guys were like asking for advice, like, oh yeah, and let me just give you a couple tips. Actually, I should thank you guys, because when I was listening to you guys, I was like, you guys seem like just a couple of normal guys. I'm like, well, I could do that. Me and my friends, my brother, we have 90 years of role-playing experience. We could put on a podcast. Of course, they they waffled on me, and Jolene had to step in, and she thought it was going to be maybe I'd be at this for like a month or two, and then we'd lose interest.
Get over it.
And here you are, what, 300 episodes later or something.
almost. So I thank you guys for giving me a little bit of inspiration to even start this podcast. I mean, for us, it's just a hobby. It's just something to do, something that we can do together and have a lot of fun with. But I really appreciate you guys coming on, and
Thank you.
and I'm sure you're gonna have a successful Kickstarter. Hopefully, you get what you want, and I'll be there. Jolene, I'm sure will let me kickstart your stuff.
Cool.
She
Yes, just
cool.
theirs.
She
no
regulates
other one.
She regulates my Kickstarter stuff.
But you're not going to let him
tried
do
to.
rubber barrel, I'm sure, Jolene.
So, well, I really appreciate you guys coming on.
Yes, thank you so much.
No, thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. Thank you, guys. It's been brilliant.
It has.
Thank you for listening. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul,
Angeline.
and you have a good day. And thank you, Dave and Mateo from the Effekt podcast for coming on and doing this interview.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.